Every day we hear Christian catchphrases, a kind of Christianese, if you will, made up of slogans, compressed ideas about God or faith that we drop into everyday conversations about life. Catchphrases like, the devil made me do it, or Jesus, take the wheel. And after all, what would Jesus do? What do we really mean when we say that? Well, let's take a look at some common Christian catchphrases and what the Bible has to say.
Out of the overflow of the heart, his mouth speaks. In this new series, Catchphrase Christianity, we're going to discover in a fresh new way just how true those words of Jesus's are as we look at various sayings that we use every day. There's plenty of these to choose from, isn't there? In fact, even if you're not a Christian, you've probably have heard some of these. You might have even used some of these without realizing it. But there's lots and lots of these going on. Personally, I didn't even realize how many there were until I started researching them for this series. There's classics out there like more of Jesus and less of me. There's little beauties like sometimes God will put a Goliath in your past so you can find the David within you. And my new personal favorite, you gotta faith it till you make it. I hadn't read that one before. But anyways, we're gonna consider one today. And what we're gonna consider is #blessed. Now, the first time I can remember coming across this particular catchphrase, it was in the movie Alexander and the Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. As you can deduct from the title, little 11-year-old Alexander isn't having a very good day, especially in comparison to his older siblings, Anthony and Robin. And in the movie, there's a specific scene where Alexander and his family are clustered around the breakfast table that just drives this point home. In fact, let's take a look.
Peter Pan is going to be awesome. Okay, today, Mr. Brand said that I am the most poised and elegant Peter Pan he's ever had the privilege of working with.
No way! Yeah. Wow, when is that again? Just remind me.
Mom, hello, it's tomorrow afternoon, okay?
Of course.
So please be on time and don't be embarrassing.
Yeah. Best behavior.
Honey, please don't embarrass her.
Dad, that includes you.
I know.
Dear honey.
Dear. Guys, guess who's getting crowned Duke at the prom tomorrow?
Really? Congratulations.
Yeah, I mean, it's not official, but Celia heard from a good source. It's kind of crazy. I'm dating the hottest girl in school. I'm getting crowned at prom. And once I get my license tomorrow, I kind of have everything I've ever wanted. And #blessed, you know?
Apparently, #blessed means getting everything you've ever wanted. Listen, I don't know who wrote that line, but they nailed it, didn't they? That's exactly what we most often mean when we use this slogan. And if you think about your life and maybe things that you've said or maybe things that you've posted, you could probably come up with something strikingly similar to that line. And you don't have to include the hashtag, by the way, to use blessed in the same way that Anthony in the movie does. In fact, I think blessed is arguably the most Christian, or most frequent Christian tag that we use. Many times, Christians and non-Christians alike, they'll talk about being blessed with a good job, a good spouse, and healthy kids. Other times, if circumstances kind of work out, but like in a surprising kind of way, we'll call it a blessing, right? We didn't see it coming. Around July 4th, we often talk about how blessed we are to live in America, and we'll throw out a few God bless Americas for good measure. And then around Thanksgiving, we'll start counting our blessings of our home and our cars and our food and more. This is incredibly common. And since it's just one word, I'm sure we've all used this in all kinds of contexts. But I think it's safe to say that this version that says, I got what I wanted, is the most common understanding of blessed. And it's easily the most common way it's used. But I wonder, how does that line up with how the scriptures use this term of blessed. Certainly, there's examples in the Bible of God blessing people with health and kids and so forth, but is that all there is to it? Is that all there is to it? I don't think so. And this morning, we're going to take a look at how the scriptures use blessed. And as we do, I think we're going to see a couple things. First of all, that blessed means something deeper and richer than we've realized. Second, that we've used blessed in ways that may be actually tipping our hand to an issue in our hearts. And third, I think that we'll realize that we might have missed some blessings and perhaps mislabeled some others as a result. And so let's dive in this morning by taking a closer look at the way that Jesus used his own hashtag blessed by turning in our Father's Word to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. This passage is probably the most famous usage of the term blessed in all the New Testament. In this passage, we have Jesus teaching his disciples and teaching crowds while he's in Galilee and he's up on a mountain. So this passage and the chapters that follow have been named the Sermon on the Mount. And it's been one of the greatest sources of inspiration for some of the largest changes our world has ever seen. And for us, it functions as the Magna Carta of the Christian life. It's describing how followers of Christ are to live in a sinful world as his ambassadors, showing what the new kingdom is to look like. Don't miss that. And you can see this understanding. It's reinforced as these chapters have several parallels actually with the book of Deuteronomy, which spelled out, again, the covenant between God and the nation of Israel as they entered the promised land. And the people of Israel were reminded of the blessings of following the Lord in the land and the trouble in the land that they would experience if they refused. The book of Deuteronomy then established how the kingdom was to operate. And Jesus borrows on this blessing in trouble language to talk about life now in the new kingdom that he's inaugurating and will someday bring in full. And so in a very real way, he's saying, listen, here's how things are supposed to work in my new kingdom. This is what I consider blessed in my kingdom. And we pick things up in verse 2. And we read this, and he opened his mouth and he taught them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Let's start unpacking this by just considering then the word blessed, because Jesus seems to be using blessed in a somewhat different way than the way that we tend to use it, than the way that Anthony used it, than the way that it's commonly understood. And I don't know about you, but I have a hard time imagining somebody taking to Facebook to say, hey, I lost my job today because of my faith, hashtag blessed, you know? I have a hard time seeing somebody sitting around the Thanksgiving table saying, man, I've just been so grieved by the sin in my life and seeing the sin all around me and the world around me. I've just been mourning that. I'm so blessed. I'm guessing I'm not the only one that has a hard time imagining that. Yet depending on how someone is making those statements, wouldn't they be in keeping with how Jesus is using the word here? So I wonder what we're missing. And this is the first question that actually we need to solve. What does it mean to be blessed in Jesus' new kingdom? What does it mean to be blessed in Jesus' new kingdom? The kingdom that Christians are a part of right now as his ambassadors. What does it mean? Well, in the passage, Jesus uses the word makarios, which we translate as blessed. This word, it's got all kinds of various forms, used in hundreds of times in the New Testament, in the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So there's lots and lots of examples to draw on. And yes, in some of those examples, we could look to, there's similarities as to how we use blessed, as God blesses someone with his favor and it results in wealth or a healthy family and more. And so yes, by all means, the believer can call those things blessings. But if you're paying attention in those passages, you'll see that there's something deeper going on than simply these surface level results of blessings. If blessing stays actually at just that surface level of just doing someone a good turn in life or something like that, like we typically use it, it actually starts to struggle as the waters begin to get deeper. After all, the term in the Bible, it's not just used of talking about God to man, but of man to God. The psalmist often cries out, "Bless the Lord, O my soul." I can remember reading that as a kid or hearing that as a kid and thinking, how can my soul do something nice for God? It didn't make sense. It didn't fit with the way I typically thought of blessing because God doesn't need anything. And in light of how it's used specifically in this text, it deals with something more than God just doing something nice for us. So what does it mean to be blessed in Jesus' new kingdom? Here's how one scholar put it. He said, to be blessed means more than happiness. It means to be favored and approved by God. To be favored and approved. And he's spot on. That's how Jesus is using this term. He's saying, listen, in my kingdom, here's someone who is approved and favored. And that's the definition that we need to adopt. Blessed refers to someone who is approved and favored by God in the new kingdom. Blessed refers to someone who is approved and favored by God in the new kingdom. That's what's actually at the heart of blessing in the scriptures. In the Old Testament, God is saying, listen, here's someone who has my approval, someone on whom I am giving my favor to. And that favor at times may or may not result in some kind of material or some kind of health benefit. For the psalmist, he's calling on his heart to say that God is approved. That God is right in all of his ways, that he's good in all that he does. He's what I favor, who I want to give my praise to. And here, Jesus is saying, look, here's someone who has my approval and the favor that they'll experience. Here's someone who is blessed in my kingdom, in my way of doing things. Now, if that's how the scriptures would have us understand the term, then what does that mean for how we're using blessed? What does that mean? Well, first of all, it means that we haven't grasped its depth. First and foremost, blessed means something deeper and richer than we've realized. I think maybe the best way to talk about blessed in light of this passage is to pull back up the old Venn diagram from 7th grade English class. I don't know if you remember those, but you'd have two ideas and two circles that you would write down. And where those circles would overlap, you would write down how these two ideas were similar. And where they didn't overlap, you would write down how they were different. And so first, let's think about how are these ideas similar? Well, on our best days, we'll use blessed to recognize how someone is experiencing a tangible display of God's favor in life. Like, I got a good job, I got a new job maybe. We bought a house after 18 times of attempting, right? We finally got blessed. Or, I'm marrying the guy of my dreams. I'm so blessed, right? At best, that's how these concepts are similar. But here's the thing. Why does our concept of blessing stop so long before we get to any of the items on Jesus' list? If that's how they're similar, why is it that that our list stops so far short of anything of someone who is called blessed with Jesus here. So here's how they're different. They have a different set of standards for what is approved of in life, and ergo, what God's favor should look like in those moments. In other words, our concept of blessed stops short of Jesus' list because it's still being formed by the standards, the values of the old kingdom of this world. And it's struggling to be transformed by the standards, the values of the new kingdom that Jesus is establishing. Think about it, friend. We struggle to consider being poor in spirit, persecuted, meek, and so forth as blessings. We don't think of those things as blessings because according to this world, they're not. They don't meet the standards. They're not approved. Blessings according to this world looks like Anthony's list. Driver's license, pretty date for prom, and being the Duke at prom, right? Or in other words, power, comfort, and significance. Power, comfort, and significance. Getting everything we ever wanted. That's the world's standards for what gets approved. It's based on what you want. And that's why the world can use blessed to announce approval on all kinds of actions and all kinds of attitudes and a lifestyle of someone that has anything but God's approval. And actually, what they're counting as blessings may very well in those situations be not examples of God's favor in their life, but of someone preparing to reap his judgment. And listen, as Christians, if Jesus' version of a blessed life, if it doesn't sound very familiar or too interesting to us, then aren't we tipping our hand to the attitude and the allegiance in our hearts for the standards of approval that still really matter to us? For what is really blessed, what's approved and favored in our life, what that's to look like? So A.W. Tozer reminds us, though, Jesus never uttered opinions. He never guessed. He knew and he knows. His words are not as Solomon's were, the sum of sound wisdom and the result of keen observation. He spoke out of the fullness of the Godhead, and his words are the very truth itself. He is the only one who could say blessed with complete authority, for he is the blessed one come from the world above to confer blessedness upon mankind. And his words were supported by deeds mightier than any performed on this earth by any other man. It is wisdom for us to listen. So listen, church. We need to take this passage seriously and not just shrug off how we're using blessed. Instead, we need to reframe in our minds the concept so that we recognize and we embrace and we celebrate the life with God and others that Jesus declares is approved, is favored, is the blessed life in the new kingdom. And we need to do that not just for ourselves, but we need to do that for our children's sake. We need to do that with them. We need to do that with our neighbors, our coworkers, our friends, our relatives, and others around us, because we are to be ambassadors of the new kingdom, displaying what this is to look like. We start doing that by adopting a new definition for what blessed is. And we start using it like Jesus does. So let's consider. How does Jesus describe someone who's blessed? Let's get clear on that so we don't continue to miss or to mislabel what Jesus identifies as a blessed life. To do that, let's look back at the text. Now, when we read this passage, it's very easy for us to think about the peacemakers, the meek, and those who mourn as these standalone ideas, separated. But the structure of this passage, with its repetition and actually the very concepts themselves, it won't let you do that. The passage is written to be taken as a whole. In the first half here, verses 3 through 6, they show someone who's considered blessed in relation to God. And then the second half, verses 7 through 10, they show us who's considered blessed in relation to other people. And then Jesus, he ends here with this capstone statement, verses 11 and 12, where he just drives this point home by changing his audience and makes this point. And so And so taken together, it shows us who Jesus is describing as approved or blessed. So starting in verse 3, he describes someone who is first poor in spirit, which means that the starting point for someone who is approved by God begins with them recognizing that they are themselves spiritually bankrupt, that they are poor in spirit. They are bringing nothing to the table. As another pastor pointed out, there's no room for a spiritual middle class in the new kingdom. If you're still banking on some credit of living a moral life, that won't work. Rather, blessed is someone who is poor in spirit. Building on top of that, verse 4 leads us to those who mourn. Again, these are building on top of each other. And so one here informs the next. And so this is referring to someone who is grieved by how utterly bankrupt they are and everyone else is around them spiritually, inside and out because of sin, which sets us up for verse 5. And someone who is meek. And this is someone who has been humbled in light of their sin. They're no longer looking around playing a spiritual comparison game where they say, well, I'm better than Jerry, right? And so that's why God should approve me. I'm better than so-and-so, and that's why you should favor me. No, they've recognized in their sorrow over their sin that before God, they're spiritually bankrupt, and it draws them away from this inflated view of themselves and of their own greatness, which leads them to hunger and thirst for righteousness. Verse 6. Listen, we hunger and we thirst for something that we need but do not have. In the new kingdom, blessed, approved, and favored is someone who knows that they're not, but wants to be made right with God. Do you see how the first half here of these statements, they fit together for a description of someone who is blessed in relation to God? Do you see it? Because let me tell you, the world doesn't. The world doesn't. The world looks at this list and it says, that's a person who is suffering from low self-esteem, right? That's a person who's being way too hard on themselves. They need to learn to see themselves as too blessed to be stressed. They need to accept themselves, reject this kind of thing. And the Bible says, baloney. In fact, realize that as long as you're still doing the judging, as long as you're still the one that's doing all the esteeming, you can't judge yourself hard enough. You can't. But you can accept God's judgment of you. And then by faith, that Christ has borne that judgment on your behalf. They paid it all for you. They bore the curse on your behalf so that you could have the blessing on his behalf. After all, let's not miss the other half here. Because for this person who has recognized that they are spiritually bankrupt, that they are mourning their grievous sin, that they are utterly humbled by it all, that they're now longing to be made right, we're told that they're standing in heaven, verse 3, is already certain. In that place, it is already certain. And that someday their grief over their sin and their brokenness will be over, that they will be comforted, that those who are low and humble today will receive all, they will inherit the earth, and their desire to be made righteous will be satisfied. That's great news. That's great news. Friends, this is someone who's blessed, who has been approved and favored by Jesus in his new kingdom. It's someone who's saved. These are blessings that are deeper than what we typically think of blessings. And they are blessings that can never be taken away. This understanding of who Jesus says is blessed, it should reframe who we actually see as blessed in life and what we see as a blessing. Perhaps you and I need to actually have maybe a more thoughtful and a more evaluative eye towards what we consider being blessed. Perhaps some of us have need to reevaluate our life. When we look at our life, to reconsider what we call a blessing. As we look back at our past and some of our experiences where we've gone, God wasn't blessing me here and so forth. Maybe we actually need to reconsider it. That just because we couldn't see it or we couldn't tangibly feel it, that perhaps that was actually part of God leading us straight into this place. Perhaps we need to reevaluate our story. One way to do that is to simply ask yourself, if this kind of blessed life interests you, has this kind of life held any interest for you? And let me suggest that if it's just now starting to interest you, then maybe you've miscounted some blessings and mislabeled some others of what he approves and what he favors. But as you understand more and more of what Jesus considers blessed in his new kingdom, it'll change how you look at the story of your life and what you call blessed and what you don't. Now, to fully grasp that, we need to finish the description that Jesus is giving here of someone who's blessed, because again, we have to take this as a whole. And as we do, we'll see that what naturally follows for someone with this kind of relationship with God, verse 7, is being merciful. That after all, if you're not proceeding by merit, but by mercy, it follows that you look at others with mercy too. Verse 8 advances this to being pure in heart, that someone who's longing to obey God's commands in life. They want to have a right standing before God and to live out of that righteousness with others. In verse 9, he moves us forward. We see that they choose to serve as peacemakers. That is, that in their obedience, they help others to be reconciled to God and one another. And finally, verse 10, Jesus describes this as someone who is persecuted for righteousness' sake. They suffer in this life for pursuing what God declares to be good, even in the face of the world's values. And so let me be clear on this. It's not that this person is to pursue persecution. A Christian isn't to pursue persecution, but they forego the comforts of life when they contend for the righteousness of Christ. That's what a Christian's called to do. And it's at this point that Jesus makes this capstone statement. And he says, "Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account." You know, church, I spent some time meditating on those words and this description. And it was at this point that it caused me to pause and to think about the way that I have evaluated my own life. Because to be merciful, you actually have to have been legitimately wronged in this life. And I don't know if you've ever attempted to be a peacemaker, but it almost always involves pursuing difficult and unpleasant people. And to get pushed around, to get mistreated, to get slandered, to get lied about for Jesus' sake, it's painful. It's painful. I've experienced some of that before, and it's tough. But this passage says that I'm to look at that by Jesus' standards and consider myself blessed. Blessed, approved, and favored. And if Jesus is calling a lot of hard things blessed, I had better fix in my mind ahead of time why he does that. Why is someone here someone who's blessed? Thinking about this, it reminded me of another passage that A.W. Tozer wrote, and picturing things this way, where he said, there are two kinds of ground. Fallow ground, a ground that's been broken up by the plow. The fallow ground is smug, contented, protected from the shock of the plow and the agitation of the harrow. Such a field has stability. Nature has adopted it. It can be counted upon to remain always the same. Safe, undisturbed, it sprawls lazily in the sunshine, the picture of sleepy contentment. But it is paying a terrible price for its tranquility. Never does it feel the motions of mounting life, nor see the wonders of bursting seed, because it's afraid of the plow and the harrow. In direct opposite to this, the cultivated field has yielded itself to the adventure of living. The protecting fence has opened to admit the plow. The plow has come as plows always come, practical, cruel, businesslike, and in a hurry. Peace has been shattered by the shouting of the farmer and the rattle of machinery. The field has felt the travail of change. It has been upset, turned over, bruised, and broken, but its rewards come hard upon its labors. The seed shoots up into the daylight, and its miracle of life. New things are born to grow, mature, and consummate the grand prophecy latent in the seed when it entered the ground. Nature's wonders follow the plow. There are two kinds of lives also, the fallow and the plowed. Friend, if God has approved and favored you in opening up your heart to the reality of his Son, Jesus Christ, and he has blessed you to experience the plow, to show mercy, to live purely, to be a peacemaker to the lost, and yes, to suffer on his account, then don't miss this. Why is this someone who's blessed? Because his reward is yours. The joy of the plowed field is yours because new life, a new kingdom, a new way of doing things is springing forth in you and from you. And so the joy of verse 12 is yours. When Jesus said, rejoice and be glad. Why? For your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Friend, don't just identify the blessings of someone living for Jesus, but embrace them and celebrate them. Surprise people with how you talk about it. I guarantee you, Jesus shocked his audience when he laid this all out. In fact, the text tells us that people were astonished when he finished his teaching. And for you and I, when we call out persecution on the account of following Jesus for the hardship that it is, and recognize the blessing that God has in it for us, it will not only refine us, but it will demonstrate the new kingdom of Christ to those around us. Church, don't make blessed are the merciful, pure in heart, the peacemaker and the persecuted and so forth, the blessed life that you'd rather not have. Don't make those the blessings that you'd like to keep up on the shelf, that you'd like to not experience. Don't make the mistake of the fallow field and trade new life for avoiding hardship. If you do, you'll never know the joy that follows from receiving the approval and the favor that only a heavenly Father can give as he looks at your life. And on the account of Jesus Christ, he says, blessed. Don't miss that. Let's pray. Lord God, we recognize that for some of us, our story, that we need to reevaluate it. That we have looked at our life and we have said that this was a tragedy, that this was a hardship, and we missed in there the blessing that you were doing. That you were pruning things off of our life that shouldn't have been there. That you are preparing us to be more fruitful in your kingdom. That you are planting the seeds of the gospel deeper in our lives. That you are using us to plant the seeds of the gospel in other people's lives. God, may you lead us to a point where we reevaluate the blessings in our life so that they align with what you have called blessed in your kingdom. And that we wouldn't just look at the surface level blessings and thank you for them, but may we reach deeper than that, and may we begin to praise you and thank you for the blessings of the turned over soil in our life, the things that have been broken up, so that you could grow up in us the new kingdom that we look forward to. May that be the reality of our hearts, God, that we would recognize, we would embrace, and we would celebrate what you call blessed. I pray that in your blessed name. Amen.